Since childhood, the Carpenters has mystified me in a manner that remains inarticulate. And I owe this not just to that sense of untimely wisdom in their early records. In Karen Carpenter's voice lies a depth replete with haunting. Haunting not just for the richness in her lament, but also for what eventually happened. There have been a myriad of accounts of Karen's life, one of the first being the Karen Carpenter story released on New Year's Day of 1989. This television film tries to immortalize the only female voice that could transcend 1,000 lights of pain. But in the process, it renders her into an apparition without cadence. The movie begins with an unsettling dissonance. A teenage Karen calling out to that version of herself long since savaged by anorexia and racing to her last moments. As harrowing as this scene is, it compels you to move back in time and determine just why that February day came to pass in the way it did. Subsequently, we bear witness to Karen's blossoming, her transcendence from a wisecracking tomboy in the shadow of her brother, to the avant-garde woman holding her own at the drum kit with a voice unheard of for the ages. Cynthia Gibb, though, doesn't quite evoke the pained nuance that was typical of Karen. We hear her distinctively tortured contralto from behind and beyond, but Gibb mimes through with hardly a trace of intuition. And with her pasty makeup and vacillating wigs, she seems more like a drag artist as opposed to a living image of Karen. So full of effervescence is she, though, that we still yearn to catch her as she wastes away before our eyes. Gibb's portrayal of Karen is that of a conflicted songstress struggling for autonomy. But her biggest obstruction lies not among the overzealous managers or callous press. It comes from her mother Agnes, played excellently by Louise Fletcher. Had it been any other actress, the role of the overbearing matriarch would have likely been served with a fusillade of tears and indignation. The brilliance of Fletcher is she doesn't strive to be so haughty. She barely has to impose herself at all, in fact. Even when she speaks in hushed tones and is at her most sincere, there's an opaque harshness to her person that just easily emasculates. In one scene, both Agnes and Karen talk over the phone from far ends of the world. Although Agnes can't be seen or heard, we can sense her frigidity bristling through that lonely hotel room as well as the heavy discontent it imposes on her world-famous daughter. Without Fletcher's unnerving performance, it's doubtful that this biopic would find its purpose even in the 3 decades since it was aired and pirated for posterity online. Besides a cursory display of Richard's short bout with Quaalude addiction, nothing of significance is said other than the rudimentary aspects of the Carpenter's story. There are also hints of the disconcerting hokiness which plagued the duo's image despite their pleas for stature. Karen is meant to be agitating for independence, but it's questionable whether being called squirt and kiddo in her early 30s contributes to her development. It's this cookie-cutter sensibility that constrains her and makes the enigmas of her life seem all too easy. And much as we're forced to go along, we know that the underlying dynamics were so much murkier. Had this film explored those attempts by Karen to step outside her tightly anchored domain, we'd have more of an actual human being and less of a showwoman. For all its inadequacies, however, I believe this film ought to be watched by filmgoers and audiophiles alike as a fine example of remarkable sound design. As producer and arranger for the Carpenters, Richard Carpenter often knew best how to enrapture listeners and then capture a sense of melancholia at its most profound. That same notable hint of genius is apparent throughout this film, for which he acted as musical director. Whereas many films today know only to use music as a way of conjuring substance where none exists, Richard clearly has a knack for weaving the subtleties of sound to smoothen the flow from one sequence to the next.
That's it. Great. Perfect. Let's do it together.
And at times when we seem to be at a moment of undistilled hope for the two siblings, there's this portent of darkness, a reminder of the perpetual sadness that propelled them to fame but also became their greatest burden. More than that, he knows how to use his sister's immaculate voice to carry us into a trance through the pivotal moments of her troubled life. During Karen's moments of deep-seated unhappiness, not one word needs to be said by anyone. Richard makes it seem like the singles were part and parcel of her existence, and not just a mocky aberration of the Woodstock era as was cynically argued by some critics. It's clear that Karen Carpenter had to contend with the absence of love in her life as well as her own identity. In that sense, she was more than the saccharine personality who just happened to epitomize a widely mispronounced and misunderstood eating disorder. The ultimate reason why the Karen Carpenter story doesn't endure is it glaringly refuses to excavate other aspects of Karen's life which might have contributed to her fatal misadventures. Here is a woman grappling with demons that eventually deprived her of the future which loomed so brightly in the horizon. Despite that, she remains trapped in the same four walls that compel her on what not to say and where to go. As a result, whatever truth we have within our grasp dissipates until her image remains as it was. A young, vibrant singer forcing a smile whilst slowly fading to eternity.